My name is Patricia Williams, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. At my son's wedding, the bride sat me in the kitchen while I had paid for everything. I smiled, stayed quiet, and then I canceled it all. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't just about one terrible day. It's about how I became a stranger in my own life. I'm 62 years old, a widow for the past 8 years since my husband Robert passed from a heart attack. For the last 3 decades, I worked as a certified public accountant at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. My days followed a comfortable routine. Wake up at 6, coffee with the morning news, drive to work in my reliable Honda Civic, handle other people's finances with meticulous care, then come home to cook dinner for my son Michael and his girlfriend Ashley, who had been living in my house for the past 2 years. My 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street wasn't much to look at from the outside, but it was paid off, well-maintained, and filled with 30 years of memories. The kitchen was my sanctuary, granite countertops I'd saved 2 years to afford, the breakfast nook where Michael used to do homework, family photos covering the refrigerator door. Every evening, I'd spend an hour preparing meals that could feed a small army, making sure there were leftovers for Michael's lunch the next day. It was my way of showing love, the same way my mother had shown hers. Michael was my pride and joy, my only child who'd grown into a 30-year-old software engineer with kind eyes and his father's gentle smile. After college, he'd moved back home temporarily to save money for a house down payment. That temporary arrangement stretched into 5 years. But I didn't mind. Having him around filled the empty spaces Robert's death had left behind. When Michael started dating Ashley Martinez 3 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She seemed sweet, polite, always complimenting my cooking and helping with dishes without being asked. Ashley was 28, worked in marketing coordination for a downtown medical practice, and had this way of making Michael laugh that reminded me of how Robert used to make me laugh. She was petite with dark hair she wore in a perfect bun, always dressed professionally, always saying yes ma'am and no ma'am like her mother had raised her right. When she started staying over weekends, then moved in completely 18 months ago, it felt natural. She contributed to groceries, kept her spaces clean, and seemed genuinely interested in family stories when I'd share memories over dinner. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed, but at the time, everything seemed perfectly normal for a young couple building their life together. They talked about saving money, about their future plans, about wanting to do things right. Ashley would ask thoughtful questions about family traditions, about recipes I'd inherited from my grandmother, about the neighborhood and how long we'd lived here. She seemed to genuinely care about becoming part of our family history. But somewhere, around month 6 of living together under my roof, subtle changes began creeping in like shadows at sunset. Ashley started making small suggestions about the house. Maybe we could rearrange the living room furniture to create better flow, perhaps update the guest bathroom with more modern fixtures. Wouldn't it be nice to have a more contemporary color scheme in the dining room? At first, I appreciated her input. The house had remained largely unchanged since Robert's death, and maybe it was time for some fresh perspective. The suggestions became more frequent and more specific. Ashley would mention how her friend's mother had downsized to a lovely senior community with built-in social activities and maintenance-free living. She'd leave real estate flyers for retirement communities on the kitchen counter, always with a note about how active and vibrant these places were for people in their golden years. When I'd find these materials, Ashley would quickly explain that she just thought I might find them interesting, that she worried I might get lonely as I got older. Michael seemed oblivious to these subtle changes. He was focused on his career, working long hours to position himself for a promotion that would finally give them the financial security to move out and start their own household. When I'd mention Ashley's comments about retirement communities, he'd wave them off with, "Mom, she's just looking out for you. She cares about your future." It was easier to believe that interpretation than to examine the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. The conversations between Michael and Ashley began happening in hushed tones behind closed doors. I'd catch fragments, something about timeline and after we're married and the house situation. When I'd enter rooms where they'd been talking, conversations would stop abruptly, replaced by bright smiles and quick subject changes. Ashley would immediately ask about my day or compliment something I was wearing, but the atmosphere felt charged with unfinished business. I started noticing how Ashley would rearrange small things when she thought I wasn't looking. My reading glasses would migrate from the kitchen counter to the dining room table. Mail would be sorted and stacked differently than my usual system. The remote control would appear in different rooms from where I'd left it. These weren't major disruptions, but they created a constant sense of disorientation in my own space, like living in a house where the furniture moved itself when I wasn't watching. The most unsettling change was how Ashley began speaking about me to others. When her friends would visit, I'd overhear conversations where she'd refer to Michael's living situation as temporary, about how they were staying with his mother for now, but had plans to get their own place soon. The way she said it made it sound like I was the temporary element, like they were the permanent residents graciously allowing me to remain until other arrangements could be made. One evening in late fall, I overheard Ashley on the phone with someone talking in the kitchen while she thought I was upstairs. Her voice carried the casual cruelty that people use when they believe they're speaking privately. It's not ideal, but we're making it work. She's sweet, but you know how older people can be set in their ways. Michael feels guilty about moving out and leaving her alone. But honestly, she'd probably be happier somewhere with people her own age. The conversation continued, but I'd heard enough. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I was becoming a stranger in my own home. The woman who had opened her door, her heart, and her wallet to this young couple was slowly being repositioned as an obstacle to their happiness rather than a facilitator of it. My intuition, finely tuned from years of managing other people's financial affairs and detecting inconsistencies in their stories, was screaming warnings I'd been too polite to acknowledge. On a cold December evening, as we sat around the dinner table eating the pot roast I'd spent 3 hours preparing, Michael cleared his throat in that way that announced important news. Ashley's hand found his across the table, and they exchanged one of those loaded looks that couples share before delivering life-changing information. My heart started beating faster, though I couldn't say whether it was from excitement or dread. "Mom," Michael began, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "Ashley and I have something wonderful to tell you. We're engaged." The diamond on Ashley's finger caught the light from the chandelier, sparkling like captured starlight. It was beautiful, substantial, the kind of ring that spoke of serious intentions and significant investment. My first instinct was pure joy. My son had found love, was taking the next step toward building his own family. I jumped up from my chair and embraced them both, tears springing to my eyes as I imagined grandchildren and holidays and the continuation of family traditions. "This is wonderful news," I said, meaning every word. "When did this happen? Tell me everything." As they shared the story of the proposal, a romantic dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first date, the ring hidden in Ashley's dessert, her surprised delight when she realized what was happening, I found myself volunteering before they could even ask. "I want to pay for the wedding," I announced, the words flowing from a place of genuine love and celebration. "It would be my honor to give you both the wedding of your dreams." Ashley's eyes widened with what I interpreted as grateful surprise. "Mrs. Williams, that's incredibly generous, but we couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," I interrupted, warming to the idea with every passing second. "Robert and I always planned to pay for Michael's wedding. It's what parents do. Consider it our gift to your new beginning together." Michael looked uncomfortable with the idea of such a large financial gesture, but Ashley's reluctance seemed to evaporate quickly. "Well, if you're absolutely sure, she said, though her tone suggested she was already mentally planning. We were thinking of something simple, elegant, nothing too extravagant. Over the following weeks, simple and elegant evolved into something much more ambitious. Ashley threw herself into wedding planning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been dreaming of this day since childhood. She bought bridal magazines by the dozen, bookmarked wedding websites, and created elaborate spreadsheets tracking every detail from flowers to photographers to reception venues. Each conversation about the wedding brought new revelations about Ashley's vision. The intimate gathering grew from 40 guests to 80 to over 120. The simple ceremony required a premium venue with cathedral ceilings and crystal chandeliers. The elegant reception needed a live band, premium bar service, and a menu that read like something from a five-star restaurant. With each expansion of scope came a corresponding increase in budget. Ashley would present these changes with careful reasoning. Michael's extended family deserved to be included. Her sorority sisters had always been like family to her. A wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event that warranted doing things properly. When I'd express concern about costs, she'd quickly backtrack, offering to scale things down, but in a way that made me feel like I was being cheap about my son's happiness. The final budget totaled $45,000. $15,000 for the venue rental, $12,000 for catering, $8,000 for floral arrangements, $6,000 for the band, and $4,000 for photography. It was more money than I'd ever spent on anything except my house, more than many people's annual salaries. To cover it, I liquidated my retirement savings account and took out a home equity loan against the house Robert and I had worked so hard to pay off. But watching Michael's happiness, seeing how Ashley's face lit up when she talked about becoming his wife, the financial sacrifice felt worthwhile. This was my son's future, the beginning of the next generation of our family. What good was money sitting in accounts if it couldn't be used to create joy for the people I loved most? As the wedding planning progressed, I began to notice a subtle shift in Ashley's behavior toward me. While she remained unfailingly polite, there was a new dynamic emerging where she positioned herself as the decision-maker and me as the financial backer. Guest list decisions were made without my input, even though several of my longtime friends and family members weren't included. "We're keeping it to immediate family and close friends," Ashley explained when I asked about my sister and her children. "We want an intimate atmosphere." Yet Ashley's college roommates, cousins from 3 states away, and her mother's book club somehow made the intimate list. When I suggested my neighbor Margaret, who'd been like a second mother to Michael growing up, Ashley's response was diplomatic, but firm. "We've already finalized the seating arrangements, and adding anyone now would throw off the whole balance. The flowers, venue decorations, menu selections, and even the church ceremony details were chosen without consulting me. Though every decision required my financial approval, I felt like a bank rather than the mother of the groom, providing funding for choices I had no voice in making. When I'd try to offer suggestions or express preferences, Ashley would listen politely and then explain why her original plan was more practical, more elegant, or more appropriate for the overall vision. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ashley presented me with the final vendor contracts to sign. As I reviewed the paperwork, I realized that my name appeared on every single agreement as the financially responsible party. But Ashley was listed as the primary contact for all communication and decision-making. If anything went wrong, if any changes needed to be made, if any vendor had questions, they would go through Ashley. I was paying for everything, but controlling nothing. That evening, after Ashley and Michael had gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen reviewing the contracts with the same careful attention I'd apply to any financial document in my professional life. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Several vendors had Ashley's personal cell phone as the only contact number. The florist contract included a clause about discretionary substitutions that gave Ashley authority to change arrangements without notifying the paying party. Most troubling of all, the venue contract contained a section about special event coordination that I didn't remember discussing. I called the venue the next morning, introducing myself as Patricia Williams, the mother of the groom and the person paying for the reception. When I asked about the special coordination services, the event manager's response chilled me to the bone. "Oh yes, Mrs. Martinez specifically requested that we ensure you're kept comfortable and involved in kitchen coordination during the reception," she said in a bright, helpful tone. "She mentioned that you really enjoy the organizational aspects and would appreciate being part of the behind-the-scenes team rather than dealing with all the social pressures of the main event. Kitchen coordination, behind-the-scenes team, social pressures." The woman I'd opened my home to, supported financially, and trusted with my son's happiness, had specifically arranged for me to be hidden away in the kitchen during the wedding I was paying for. Not only hidden, but positioned as someone who would prefer to be excluded from the main celebration, as if being treated like hired help was somehow a favor being done for my comfort. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every interaction, every subtle comment, every small change that had occurred over the past 2 years. The picture that emerged was devastatingly clear. Ashley hadn't just been planning a wedding, she'd been orchestrating my exit from my son's life, positioning me as an elderly woman who needed management rather than respect, someone to be accommodated rather than honored. The house suggestions, the retirement community brochures, the gradual exclusion from decisions about my own financial contributions. It had all been leading to this moment. After the wedding, after she was legally family, after my usefulness as an ATM machine was complete, I would be gently but firmly encouraged to move along to somewhere more appropriate for someone my age. But Ashley had made one crucial error in her calculations. By putting herself in charge of all vendor communications while leaving me as the financially responsible party, she'd given me something she probably never considered: complete power to make this wedding disappear. As I finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of morning, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If Ashley wanted me in the kitchen so badly, she was about to learn exactly what I was capable of cooking up. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes everything look like a magazine cover. I woke up early, took extra care with my hair and makeup, and put on the navy blue dress I'd bought specifically for this day. Elegant, mother of the groom appropriate, with a matching jacket that made me feel confident and dignified. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I practiced the smile I'd been perfecting for weeks, the one that would hide the storm brewing inside me. I arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony, carrying the small purse that contained not just my usual essentials, but also my phone with every vendor's contact information carefully organized and printed copies of all the contracts bearing my signature and credit card information. The Riverside Manor was even more beautiful than I'd remembered from our initial visit. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river valley. My $45,000 had certainly bought a stunning backdrop for what was about to unfold. Ashley's mother, Carmen Martinez, was already positioned in the front row, wearing a burgundy dress that clearly announced her status as the mother of the bride. She occupied the seat directly in front of the altar, the spot traditionally reserved for the groom's parents. When I approached to introduce myself and find my proper place, Carmen looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Patricia, you look lovely, dear. Ashley mentioned you might be more comfortable helping coordinate things behind the scenes today. She knows how much you enjoy being involved in the organizational details." The words hit me like ice water. Here it was, the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. Ashley hadn't just relegated me to the kitchen in the contracts. She'd briefed her own mother on the narrative that I preferred to be excluded from the actual celebration. I was being positioned as someone who chose to work rather than participate, as if being treated like staff was my personal preference rather than a calculated humiliation. "How thoughtful of Ashley to consider my preferences," I replied, maintaining that practiced smile while my heart hammered against my ribs. I suppose I should check on how things are progressing in the preparation areas. I made my way toward the kitchen and service areas, passing through the main reception hall where vendors were making final preparations. The florist was arranging the $8,000 worth of white roses and greenery I'd paid for, creating centerpieces that looked like something from a royal wedding. The band was setting up their equipment on the stage, checking microphones and tuning instruments that would soon fill the room with music purchased with my retirement savings. The bartenders were stocking the premium bar service, organizing top-shelf liquors that represented a significant portion of my home equity loan. Everything was perfect, elegant, expensive, and exactly what Ashley had envisioned for her dream wedding. In about 4 hours, this room would be filled with her guests, celebrating her marriage to my son, while I remained hidden in the kitchen like hired help. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but I kept walking, kept smiling, kept playing the role of the accommodating mother-in-law until I reached the service area. The kitchen was bustling with activity as the catering staff prepared for the 120 guests I'd never had any say in selecting. The head chef, a professional woman about my age, looked up when I entered and immediately brightened. "You must be Mrs. Williams. Ashley mentioned you'd be joining us back here today. She said you really know your way around event coordination and would appreciate being part of the team that makes everything run smoothly." Even the kitchen staff had been briefed on the story. I wasn't a guest who'd been excluded. I was a volunteer who'd requested this assignment. Ashley had been thorough in crafting a narrative that made my humiliation look like my choice, ensuring that even the people witnessing my relegation would see it as appropriate rather than cruel. "That's exactly right," I said, settling into a chair positioned near the service window where I could observe the reception hall. I do love being involved in the behind-the-scenes coordination. From my vantage point, I could see the ceremony beginning. Michael looked handsome in his black tuxedo, standing at the altar with the nervous excitement of a man about to marry the woman he loved. Ashley appeared at the back of the aisle looking absolutely radiant in her white gown, the dress we'd spent $3,000 on walking toward the future I'd financed. As she passed the front row where her mother sat in the place that should have been mine, I felt something inside me crystallize into cold, hard resolve. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit. The officiant's words about love, commitment, and family were touching, and Michael's face as he watched Ashley walk toward him was filled with such pure joy that for a moment I almost wavered in my decision. But then I caught sight of Ashley's satisfied smile as she glanced toward the kitchen window, a look that seemed to say, "Everything is going exactly according to plan." That look erased any remaining doubts I had about what needed to happen next. As the newlyweds shared their first kiss and the guests erupted in applause, I pulled out my phone and began making the calls that would change everything. I started with the band leader, a seasoned professional who answered on the second ring despite the celebration happening around him. "Hi, this is Patricia Williams, the person whose credit card is on file for your services today," I said, keeping my voice calm and businesslike. "I need to inform you of an emergency family situation that requires us to cut the reception short. Please finish the song you're currently playing and then pack up immediately." "Ma'am, is everything all right? Should I make an announcement?" "No announcement necessary. Just wrap up quietly and present your final invoice to Ashley Martinez. Tell her to contact me directly about payment." The band leader, clearly confused but professionally accommodating, agreed to follow my instructions. I could see him through the service window, approaching the other band members during a brief pause between songs. Within minutes, they began the subtle process of powering down their equipment. Next, I called the bar service coordinator, identifying myself again as the financial responsible party. "I need you to close the bar immediately. There's been a payment dispute that needs to be resolved before service can continue." "A payment dispute? But Mrs. Williams, your card cleared without any issues." "That's exactly the problem. Please cease all alcohol service immediately and direct any questions to Ashley Martinez. She'll need to contact me personally to resolve this issue." The bartenders looked confused when their supervisor approached them, but they began covering bottles and closing down stations with the efficiency of professionals who'd dealt with wedding drama before. Guests who'd been approaching for drinks found themselves redirected toward the water and soft drink station, their confusion evident but polite. My third call was to the florist, who was still on site making final adjustments to the arrangements. "This is Patricia Williams. I need you to begin removing all floral arrangements immediately. There's been a significant change in our requirements." "Remove them? But Mrs. Williams, the reception is just beginning." "Yes, and I'm the person who paid for those flowers. Please collect them now and have Ashley Martinez contact me about revised arrangements." I watched through the service window as florist assistants began quietly collecting centerpieces from tables, their movements drawing puzzled looks from guests who were still transitioning from ceremony to reception. The white roses that had cost me $8,000 disappeared one table at a time, leaving bare linens and confused wedding guests in their wake. My final call was to the catering manager, the conversation that would complete my systematic dismantling of Ashley's perfect day. "This is Patricia Williams, the client responsible for payment on today's event. I need to suspend meal service pending resolution of a contract dispute." "Mrs. Williams, I don't understand. What kind of contract dispute?" "The kind that requires immediate attention from Ashley Martinez. Please halt food service and direct her to contact me personally before any further service is provided." Within 15 minutes of my phone calls, the reception had transformed from an elegant celebration into a scene of polite confusion. The music had stopped, the bar was closed, the flowers were gone, and the catering staff was quietly removing food stations. Guests milled around uncertainly, some checking their phones to see if they'd missed an announcement, others approaching the wedding party to ask if everything was all right. From my seat in the kitchen, I watched Ashley's face change from glowing bride to panic-stricken problem solver as she realized that her perfect wedding was disintegrating around her. She moved from vendor to vendor, her white dress swishing as she tried to understand what was happening and why her carefully orchestrated event was falling apart. The catering manager approached her first, explaining that service had been suspended pending contact with Mrs. Williams. Ashley's face went white as understanding began to dawn. The florist coordinator found her next, followed by the band leader, each delivering the same message. "Contact Patricia Williams to resolve the situation." I could see Ashley's eyes scanning the reception hall, looking for me among the confused guests. When she didn't find me there, her gaze turned toward the kitchen, toward the service window where I sat, calmly observing the chaos I'd created. Our eyes met across the space, and I gave her the same serene smile I'd been practicing all morning. Ashley's march toward the kitchen was a study in barely controlled fury, disguised as bridal grace. She maintained her composure until she was through the service doors, but once she was out of sight of her guests, her mask slipped completely. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "What the hell did you do to my wedding?" I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, and faced my son's new wife with the calm dignity of someone who'd finally stopped pretending not to see what was right in front of her. "I did exactly what you requested, Ashley. You wanted me in the kitchen, so here I am, coordinating from the kitchen. As it turns out, when you're the person whose name is on every vendor contract, kitchen coordination can be quite comprehensive." "You can't do this. This is my wedding day. These people are our guests." "They're your guests," I corrected. "I wasn't invited to be a guest. I was assigned to kitchen duty, remember? And from the kitchen, I've managed to coordinate the most honest representation of my role in this celebration. I'm not your mother-in-law. I'm your ATM machine. So I turned off the money." Ashley's face cycled through emotions, rage, disbelief, calculation, and finally, a desperate kind of panic as the full implications hit her. "You're being ridiculous. I never said you had to stay in the kitchen. Carmen was just trying to make sure you felt included." "Included in kitchen duty while she sits in my seat? Ashley, I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I know exactly what you've been planning. The retirement home brochures, the comments about me being set in my ways, the way you've gradually taken over my house while positioning me as a temporary resident. It's all been leading to this moment, hasn't it?" Before Ashley could respond, Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of confusion and growing alarm. "Mom, Ashley, what's going on? People are saying the reception is canceled." I turned to face my son, the boy I'd raised to be kind and honest, who somehow couldn't see that the woman he'd just married had been systematically pushing his mother out of his life. "Michael, sit down. There are some things you need to know about the woman you just married." I reached into my purse and pulled out printed copies of the vendor contracts, the venue coordination notes, and the email thread I'd discovered between Ashley and the wedding planner. "Your wife specifically arranged for me to be kept in the kitchen during the reception I paid $45,000 for. Not only that, but she's been planning my exit from your life since the day she moved into my house." Michael's eyes moved between the documents and Ashley's increasingly pale face. "Ashley, is this true? Did you really ask them to keep Mom in the kitchen?" "It's not like that," Ashley started, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just thought she might be more comfortable not having to deal with all the social pressure." "Stop." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I was done with lies and manipulation disguised as consideration. "Michael, your wife has spent 2 years positioning me as an obstacle to your happiness rather than a support system. She's been planning to move me into a retirement home so you two can have my house to yourselves. The only reason she was nice to me was because she needed my money for this wedding." The kitchen fell silent except for the distant murmur of confused guests in the reception hall. Michael looked like a man watching his world reorganize itself into an unrecognizable configuration. Ashley stood frozen, perhaps realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling faster than she could rebuild it. "That's not true," she whispered, but the denial sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Then explain the emails," I said, spreading them out on the stainless steel prep counter. "Explain the vendor instructions. Explain why your mother is sitting in my seat while I'm hidden in the kitchen. Explain why none of my friends or family were invited to this intimate celebration that somehow included your college roommates and your mother's book club." Michael picked up the papers with shaking hands, his face growing more troubled with each page. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails discussing managing the mother-in-law situation, vendor instructions about keeping me comfortable and busy in the service areas, even a text thread about post-wedding plans for encouraging Patricia to consider more appropriate living situations for someone her age. "Ashley," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying a note I'd never heard before, "tell me this isn't what it looks like." But Ashley had moved beyond denial into damage control mode. "Fine. Yes, I arranged for your mother to help coordinate from the kitchen. Yes, I think she'd be happier in a community with people her own age. Is that such a crime? I'm trying to build a life with you, Michael, and having your mother hovering over every decision we make isn't healthy for our marriage." The honesty was refreshing, even if it was brutal. At least now we were dealing with the truth instead of polite fiction. "So you decided to humiliate her at our wedding?" Michael's voice was rising, drawing concerned looks from the catering staff, who were trying to pretend they weren't witnessing a family implosion. "I decided to give her a role that would make her feel useful without having her take over our wedding the way she's taken over every other aspect of our relationship." "Taken over?" I found my voice again, steady and clear. "Ashley, I opened my home to you. I paid for your wedding. I supported your relationship with my son in every way I could think of. The only thing I've taken over is the responsibility of funding your dreams and holding it over our heads every single day." There it was, the core of Ashley's resentment. Not that I'd been controlling or demanding, but that my generosity had made her feel indebted. Rather than feeling grateful for support, she'd felt burdened by obligation. My kindness had been reframed as manipulation in her mind. My home had become a prison, and my love for my son had been redefined as interference in their relationship. Michael looked between the two most important women in his life, his face a picture of devastation as he realized that his marriage had begun with the systematic humiliation of his mother. "Ashley, how could you do this? She paid for everything, and you had her sitting in the kitchen like hired help." "Because that's what she is," Ashley snapped, her composure finally breaking completely. "She's not our family, Michael. She's your past. I'm your future. And the sooner she accepts that and gets out of our way, the happier everyone will be." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. After 2 years of polite manipulation, Ashley had finally said what she really thought, that I was an obstacle to be removed, not a family member to be respected. The mask had come off completely, revealing the entitled young woman who saw my love and generosity as inconveniences to be managed rather than gifts to be treasured. Michael stared at his new wife as if seeing her for the first time. "Get out of our way? Ashley, she is our family. She's my mother. She's your mother, not mine, and I'm tired of pretending that her opinion matters more than mine in decisions about our life together." I stepped forward, reaching into my purse for one final document, the house deed that bore only my name, the piece of paper that made everything else academic. "Ashley, you're absolutely right about one thing. You don't have to pretend my opinion matters, but you do have to pretend to respect the person who owns the house you've been living in and the bank account that just paid for this disaster of a wedding." I placed the deed on the counter next to the vendor contracts. "This is the deed to the house, where you've been living rent-free for the past 18 months. Notice whose name appears on this document. Notice whose name doesn't." Ashley's eyes fixed on the paper, and I watched her face change as the full implications became clear. She'd been so focused on managing me out of Michael's life that she'd forgotten the practical reality of our living situation. I wasn't the elderly dependent she'd been painting me as. I was the homeowner whose generosity had made her current lifestyle possible. "You're kicking us out?" Michael asked, his voice small and hurt. "I'm establishing boundaries that should have been set a long time ago," I replied. "Ashley has made it clear that she considers me an obstacle to your happiness. Fine, I'm removing the obstacle. You two can build your life together without my interference, and I can live in my own house without being made to feel like an unwelcome guest." "Where are we supposed to go?" "Anywhere you like. As long as it's somewhere Ashley can appreciate your mother without feeling like her opinion is being forced on people who don't want to hear it." The reception hall had grown quieter as our argument filtered through the service doors. I could see guests through the window, some checking their phones, others gathering their purses and jackets as they realized the celebration was over. A few hearty souls were making the best of the situation, chatting and laughing despite the lack of music, food, and drinks, but most were clearly ready to leave. Ashley was staring at the deed, her mind clearly working through the financial implications of suddenly having to find housing, pay market rent, and fund their lifestyle without my subsidies. The wedding dress that had looked so perfect an hour ago now seemed like an expensive costume for a performance that had ended badly. "You can't do this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is insane. Michael, tell your mother she's being insane." Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes, and for a moment I wavered. This was my son, my only child, the person I loved most in the world. But love sometimes requires letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences break your heart. "Ashley," Michael said slowly, "I think you need to apologize to my mother." "Apologize? For what? For trying to build a marriage without her constant interference? For humiliating her at our wedding? For planning to kick her out of her own house? For treating her like an ATM machine instead of a family member?" Ashley's face hardened into stubborn defiance. "I'm not apologizing for wanting a life with my husband that doesn't require permission from his mother." The moment stretched between them, filled with the weight of choices that couldn't be taken back. Michael looked at his new wife, really looked at her, and I could see him recognizing something he'd been too in love to notice before. "Then I guess we're done here," I said, gathering up my papers and returning them to my purse. "The vendors have been instructed to present their final invoices to you, Ashley. You wanted to be in charge of the wedding, so you can be in charge of explaining to everyone why it ended early. Michael, you have 2 weeks to collect your belongings from the house. After that, the locks will be changed." I walked toward the kitchen door, pausing just before I reached it. "Oh, and Ashley? The retirement community brochures you kept leaving around? I visited 3 of them last week. Turns out they're quite lovely. Active communities full of vibrant people who've earned the right to be treated with respect. Maybe someday you'll be lucky enough to live somewhere like that. Of course, you'll have to fund it yourself." As I walked through the reception hall toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in months. Guests looked at me with curiosity and concern, but I smiled and nodded as if everything was perfectly normal. At the door, I turned back one last time to see the ruins of the wedding I'd paid for. Scattered guests, empty tables where centerpieces had been, a silent stage where music should have been playing. It was the most expensive lesson I'd ever purchased, but it was worth every penny to learn that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. Ashley had wanted me out of the way, and now she had exactly what she'd asked for. I just hoped my son would eventually understand that some gifts come wrapped in very painful packages. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the sunroom of my quiet house, drinking morning coffee and reading a letter from Michael. He and Ashley had moved into a cramped apartment across town, splitting the cost of rent, utilities, and groceries for the first time in their relationship. Ashley had taken a second job to help cover their expenses, and Michael had finally received the promotion he'd been working toward. The letter was an apology for not seeing what was happening, for allowing his wife to treat me with such disrespect, for taking my generosity for granted for so long. He wrote about how much he missed our evening dinners and family conversations, about how different his marriage felt when it was built on struggle rather than subsidies, about how Ashley's attitude toward him had changed once she could no longer take her comfortable lifestyle for granted. "I think Ashley is finally starting to understand what you gave us," he wrote. "Not just the money, but the sense of security that comes from knowing someone loves you enough to sacrifice for your happiness. She's working harder than she ever has in her life, and I think it's teaching her to appreciate things she used to take for granted." He asked if we could have lunch sometime, just the 2 of us, to start rebuilding our relationship on healthier terms. He wanted to establish boundaries that honored both his marriage and his relationship with me, to find a way forward that didn't require anyone to choose sides or sacrifice their dignity. I folded the letter and looked out at the garden where I'd planted new roses with the money I'd saved by not having to support 2 additional adults. The house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't for years, not empty, but serene. I had space to think, to breathe, to remember who I was before I became someone's convenient ATM. The lesson I'd learned in that wedding venue kitchen had changed everything. Respect cannot be bought, only earned. Love without boundaries becomes enabling. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop making their poor choices comfortable. I picked up my phone and called Michael. It was time to start rebuilding our relationship on terms that honored both his independence and my dignity. Because that's what real family does. They learn from their mistakes, they set healthy boundaries, and they move forward together with respect rather than resentment. After all, I'd already paid for the most expensive lesson of my life. Now it was time to enjoy the education it had provided.